Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Gray Matter. Well, we love history on this show. We know that many of the people who follow our show do. Well,
That's right.
the gentleman on our show today has written some really fascinating books about history, the types of history that I think most people are really intrigued by, and that is the sort of oddities, the unusual events in history, and the way that they're recorded. So he asks some important questions. How is history really made? He says it's not always the major events, but rather a mosaic of many small events that often form critical turning points in history. And some of these small events were seemingly tiny mistakes, and that led to great disasters. He has examples such as the end of the Roman Empire, the sinking of the Bismarck, and laboratory mistakes. And those of us who've lived through COVID know all about the laboratory mistakes. His name is Jared Knott, and he's on our program today. Thanks for being with us today, Jared.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. So he's written two books, and we're going to talk about them. What I'm interested to know is, from your background, um, very, very interesting background. But what was it that initially fascinated you about history? Have you always been a history buff, or is this something that sort of you came on to later in life?
No, from the time I was a teenager, it's a natural interest in history. But it's only been, I guess, I got the first idea for the book it's been about 11, 12 years ago. And I was working full time then. And I had, of course, 5 children. I had a wife that needs attention. And so I couldn't devote as much time to it as I can now. Now I'm still have a wife that needs attention, but the children are now grown and I'm retired. So the second book came along much, much faster. We're about, I was telling you just a moment ago, we're at 70,000 words. We're going to take it all the way up to 80,000 words. And I personally think I like it at least as much, if not a little bit better than the first book. But it's amazing how many goof ups there are in history that have all these horrible consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing how when you dig into history, of course, a lot of powerful and wise things happening, but also there are these goof ups happening and these mistakes happening that have these enormous consequences that have a ripple effect on down the line in history.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating way to look at history. It reminds me of when I was an undergraduate, when I was studying history myself. One of the most memorable exam questions I ever had was from a professor, and the final exam was circles, lines, or happenstance. Explain. And the idea was there are three different views of history. Is history cyclical? Is it sort of chronological? Does it follow a linear line? Or is it all just
Mhm.
sort of a series of random events? And I think what you explain in your book is that really there's no pure answer. There's sort of a combination, isn't there? Sometimes history is cyclical, sometimes it moves in a linear way, and other times it's just a product of what seems to be pure accident. And that's part of what you're trying to get at, and that's part of what's really fascinating about history, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And of course, those three examples, it's all those things shuffled in together. Now, human beings are making progress. I have this kind of pet theory that human beings are 55, it's kind of a tongue in cheek theory that human beings are 55% good and 45% bad. And that's why progress is so slow. Well, sometimes I wonder if it's not the other way around. If it's, we're 55% bad, I mean, there's an awful lot. I mean, too cynical, but it's an awful lot of evil in the world. Of
Yes.
course, now wars, crime, uh, terrible backstabbing, the treachery, and so on and so forth, like that. And there was a feeling, I think, back around 1989, with the fall of the Soviet Union,
Hmm.
that maybe we're turning a big corner.
Yes.
Maybe that we defeated fascism in the 20th century. Now we were defeating, in late in the 20th century, now we're defeating communism, maybe. And people in democracy seem to be on the march. It looked like this bright golden future was awaiting mankind. Well, so much, so much for that. It Yeah, what a mess. Of course, China, our biggest rally, I guess, rival, something of evil empire in its own right. Russia, not very strong really anymore, but still an evil empire. And of course, we've got the Middle East and terrorism, all that's happening with
Hmm.
Iran, and
Hmm.
also he's there. So it seems like we got a big kettle of fish here
Yeah.
that is going particularly well. Of course, that can get into the political. I don't necessarily want to do that, but that's the world we're in today.
Oh, I do want to get into political, and I want to talk about, I want to look at some of the topical issues going on right now through the lens of your book. But before we go there, I want to do something kind of fun. On your website, which people should check out, you have kind of a quiz there, and it points to
Yes,
different chapters in the book. So I want to go through a few of some of these questions and have you explain them. Question
sure.
number one: what single emotional decision by Hitler in 1944 may have prevented Germany from crushing the D-Day supply chain and causing it to collapse? And you point us to chapter two. Why chapter two? And what's the answer?
Well, yes, it's fascinating. It's the when you read history from the American perspective, you tend not to hear much about things that were favorable to the enemy, or to make the Germans look good, or the Nazis look good,
Right.
or that make the Allies look bad. So this is something that's not well known to a lot of people. But Hitler made he was Dr. Morale was giving Hitler a lot of amphetamines, apparently, and even opioids.
Yeah.
In some places, 1941-ish, right in there, he seemed to be losing control and started making a lot of emotional decisions. And the more the difficult things became, the more euphoric he was, because, of course, he was pumped up on all these amphetamines, opioids, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
He would find these huge euphoric speeches that were lasting an hour and a half about things going to go so great for him, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so the and he was very big on vengeance.
Right.
Going to get even. Well, okay, so the D-Day invasion, of course, that came in June of 1944. General Eisenhower said that if Hitler had directed the B-1s and the B-2s at Plymouth, and I think Weymouth and the other embarkation points, it would have been able to destroy such a massive amount of supplies and armaments, etc., that the D-Day invasion would have to have been postponed. Well, now the D-Day invasion had already started a week or so earlier, which means that it would have failed, and we would have had a disaster on our hands.
Hmm.
So Hitler had followed a logical progression without making emotional decisions. He could have set the whole Western Front back, who knows, a year or 2 years, and then he could have turned those same weapons to the Russians in the east, the B-1s and the B-2s,
Wow.
against the Russians. Now, you have to remember, of course, that the atomic bomb is in the pipeline. So if he had done that, that would have meant that instead of the atomic bomb being dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, a year later, it would have been dropped on Munich and Bonn
Oh,
and
wow. Incredible.
Berlin. So it might have been the same. The war might have been won by the Allies, but it would have sort of taken a different path altogether.
Very fascinating. So let's go back and answer another one of these questions now. Going back a little deeper into the annals of history, what career-altering affliction did King Henry VIII, famous King Henry VIII, and General George S. Patton have in common? This is a reference to chapter 30. So what's that? What's that all about?
Yes, that title of that chapter is The British King and the American General.
Right.
And we might even have added one or two more names. We might have put the English King, American General, also the American slash African novelist, and also the American world-renowned pilot. But I'm referring to Howard Hughes, and
Uh,
also to Ernest Hemingway, as well as King Henry, as well as George Patton. All four of those gentlemen had serious head injuries, which affected their cognitive ability. And King Henry was like to joust, a big athletic guy, and he's called Buff King Henry. But once he was jousting one day, and the visor, he left the visor of his helmet open. The lance came through, struck him on the forehead, knocked him and the horse over, and he was unconscious for I think 2 hours. The Queen there, I think, miscarried when she saw it happening, and he recovered. However, he was never the same again. And there was a study coming out of Yale where they said his behavior seemed to change markedly. After that, he became very impulsive, very cruel,
Fascinating.
and it was not this never the same again. Of course,
Mm.
he's Hemingway. He was in a plane crash in Africa, and they were trapped in a cabin. and of course, afraid the plane might catch on fire and blow up. So to get him out of the cabin, he busted his head against the glass and busted it out. But it seemed to have caused a brain injury, which accelerated his slide into form of dementia. Of course, committed suicide, just 59. And Howard Hughes seriously banged up in an airplane crash or crashes, and they think he affected his mental stability. Also, so the point of the story is, as football players have now started to learn, wear those real thick helmets, and
Right.
you get rattled, you get smacked in the head a few times, and there's a number of football players who suffer from concussions that have affected the cognitive abilities.
So let's go on to another question here. What airborne operation was canceled at the last minute, thus preventing a major Allied disaster? And this was, you described this as World War II's most embarrassing close call. Tell us about this one.
Yes, again, I mentioned that if something is embarrassing to the Allies, to Americans, you don't hear much about it, okay? Which is perfectly okay. They talk about their successes and our achievements, that sort of thing, fine. But this one is actually very embarrassing. But fortunately, we had a very good general, or two very good generals that saved us from disaster. But here's an interesting situation. It was the United States had invaded Italy. We also had Sicily under control. The Italians wanted out of the war. They did not want to be affiliated with the Germans anymore, and there was negotiation taking place between the Italians. Mussolini had been opposed at that point, the Italians and the Allies. Yeah, well, anyway, sounds great. Well, anyway, down at the commander of the 82nd Airborne was General Matthew Ridgway, who ended up being one of our very, very best generals. His top general under him in the 82nd Airborne was Maxwell Taylor. Both of the gentlemen later became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, very outstanding officers. But Matthew Ridgway and Maxwell Taylor were thinking, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't sound. I've had times before these orders come down from above and ends up getting men killed and going up, but it just doesn't pass the smell test. There's something wrong. And so he kept going up chain of command, almost to the point of being insubordinate. We need to check this out. We need to check this out. So finally, Eisenhower gave the approval for Maxwell Taylor, who was he didn't speak Italian, but he was a master of languages. Anyway, he would be smuggled in to the Rome area as an American prisoner of war, disguised as a prisoner of war. He would meet with the Italian army, view the whole situation, just confirm exactly where we stood, and all of our ducks in a row in this situation, this big airborne invasion. Well, he gets there, and it turns out the Italians are saying, no, we want out of the deal. We want to cancel the whole thing. We can't do anything. The Germans were already suspicious of the Italians. They were cutting off their gasoline. It turns out this was a big, big kicker. They thought there was only a light number of infantry German troops in the Rome area. It turns out there were armored units, major armor. So you're going to have people coming in on gliders. They have machine guns and they have rifles and hand grenades, but they don't have any armor. They don't have any heavy artillery pieces or anti-tank pieces or any anti-tank armor. They would just be an absolute massacre, especially when the Italians no longer participate. You'd think, this is kind of interesting regarding human nature. You would think, well, of course, that Eisenhower must have been very grateful. Bill Smith must have been very grateful. Matthew Ridgway and Maxwell Taylor saved them from a huge humiliation. So is that what happened? They were under kind of an unofficial censure because the whole situation made Bill Smith and Eisenhower look bad, made the other generals look good. So they were just kind of like under a big cloud of disapproval for a long time. But General Ridgway said he was never sorry. He was so glad that he had done that. He went on to become an extremely successful general in Korea in particular, and later chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. But that was a close call.
Very, very interesting. And again, these are stories that these are sort of untold stories. These are not sort of in the mainstream of history that we hear about in World War II. These are sort of getting into deep into the weeds of the story of what happened. But when you hear about them, the story you just described, they're hugely impactful. And I think I'm starting to get the picture about why you're so fascinated, why you want to write the book this way.